The alarms began before the excuses. A sharp, metallic wail sliced through Nexora's open-plan floor, echoing off the glass partitions. Screens flashed crimson. Someone shouted for DevOps. Another yelled for backup credentials. The entire licensing platform, our crown jewel, valued at $69 million, was bleeding out on the monitors. I wasn't there. At that exact moment, 10:05 a.m. I was 3 blocks away at a small coffee shop on Wacker Drive, watching the steam rise from my cup. My name is Marin Kessler, 47 years old, integration architect, coffee always black, patience once endless. For 16 years, I built the backbone of that system, every node, every token, every quiet patch at 2 in the morning. I could still picture the blinking dashboard in my mind like a heartbeat I'd memorized. Through the cafe window, I could see Nexora's tower in the distance. The skyline shimmered, and the hum of downtown Chicago carried a strange calm. I stirred my coffee once, twice, then set the spoon down. I didn't need to check the news to know what was happening. I had warned them. I had written it in bold single point of failure licensing core. Inside that office now, the founder, Daniel Greer, was probably pacing between screens. Jaw tight, sleeves rolled. He'd just landed from London, called in by chaos. I imagined his voice cutting through the panic. "Do you know who you fired?" Of course they didn't. They never really looked at me, only at what I could fix. At 9:15 a.m., just 45 minutes earlier, I had been sitting in a conference room across from Darren Hall, the new vice president of operations. His cufflinks gleamed like he'd polished them on his ego. He slid a paper across the table. "Annual adjustment $50. You should be grateful," he said. I remember the way the light caught the edge of the glass wall behind him, how the city looked so alive, while the room felt dead. I smiled, folded the paper, and stood. "Understood," I told him. Then I walked out, leaving my badge on the table, and for the first time in years, the silence followed me home. By 10:05 a.m., that silence was speaking for itself. The morning light made everything in that conference room look too clean, like the kind of sterile brightness that exposes every flaw. I sat across from Darren Hall, Nexora's new vice president of operations, who had been with the company for all of 8 weeks and already walked as if the floor existed to hold him up. He was young, hungry, and terrified of looking small. That kind of fear always came dressed as arrogance. He smiled the way people do when they've already decided what you deserve. "Marin, I wanted to personally deliver this myself," he said, sliding a crisp page toward me as if it were a promotion letter. The logo gleamed in the header. My eyes went straight to the bottom line. $50, not per week, not per month, per year. I looked up at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. 16 years of midnight rollbacks, compliance rescues, systems I'd kept alive through sheer will, and he was proud to hand me the price of a cheap dinner. "You should be grateful," he added, leaning back in his chair. "This keeps it fair across the board." Fair. That word hit harder than the number. It wasn't just the insult, it was the ease with which he said it. Like, fairness was something men like him could define for women like me. I didn't reach for the paper. I didn't speak. I just watched him tap his manicured finger against the document, his cologne heavy in the air. In that silence, I felt something shift, like a wire inside me had finally stopped humming. "Is this final?" I asked quietly. He smiled wider, mistaking calm for compliance. "If you're not happy," he said, nodding toward the door, "you know where it is." The words didn't sting, they landed softly, almost like permission. I folded the paper once, laid it neatly back on the table, and stood. "Understood," I said again. My voice sounded steady, detached, like someone already done waiting to be seen. Outside, the hallway lights flickered against the glass, catching my reflection between the panels. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize the woman standing there until I realized she finally looked free. The corridors of Nexora had always smelled the same coffee, ozone from the servers, and the faint sterility of air conditioning that never stopped humming. For 16 years, those sounds had been my lullaby. I used to joke that I'd spent more nights in that building than in my own apartment. It wasn't far from the truth. I remembered the first time the licensing corps crashed, years before Darren's shiny arrival. A federal compliance audit was underway, and if the system failed, every client contract would have fallen through. The CTO was on a flight, the board in a panic, and I was the only one who knew where the architecture actually broke. That night, the city outside my window dissolved into streaks of light while I rewrote the kernel code line by line. When the dashboards finally turned green again, the executives celebrated at a rooftop bar. I drove home in silence, hands still shaking from caffeine and adrenaline. There were nights I didn't make it home at all. Nights when the hum of the servers was my only companion. Once, I collapsed near the mainframe room, a tight pain clawing across my chest. The paramedics called it stress-induced arrhythmia. The doctor told me to rest. My manager told me the system couldn't afford another outage. I went back the next morning. On my desk sat a single photo, my niece, Elena, grinning in her MIT sweatshirt, holding the acceptance letter I'd helped her afford. She was why I stayed. The salary didn't matter. The security did. Every hour I spent patching other people's mistakes was another semester she could study without worry. But loyalty has a strange weight. It presses quietly until you stop noticing it's crushing you. I used to think staying meant strength. Now, I wasn't so sure. When I walked past my old office that morning, the blinds were drawn. My desk already reassigned. 16 years erased in a few clicks. The hum of the servers followed me down the hallway steady, indifferent, like a heartbeat that had already learned to live without me. The office was quieter than usual that morning, as if the air itself was waiting for something to end. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting each small sound mark a goodbye, the click of the drawer, the faint scrape of my travel mug against the desk, the crinkle of sticky notes peeled from the monitor one by one. The photo of Elena came last. I slipped it into my bag carefully, the glass cool against my fingers, across the open floor. Screens glowed in the pale light. No one looked up, but I could feel the weight of their glances anyway, the kind people give when they're relieved it isn't their turn. HR arrived right on schedule, a woman I'd seen in compliance meetings but never spoken to outside them. She held a clipboard like a shield, badge, laptop, and keys. Please. Her voice was polite, rehearsed, detached. I handed over each item in silence. My laptop was still open to the dashboard. Heartbeat monitor steady, green. I logged out before she could. Darren appeared just as I was zipping the cardboard box closed. He didn't address me, not directly. He spoke loudly enough for everyone else to hear. Legacy slows us down, he said, clapping his hands together as if to signal a clean break. A few heads turned, unsure whether to nod. I didn't. The elevator was 30 steps from my desk. I'd counted them before on nights when I thought about leaving and never did. Now, every step sounded like a clock ticking towards something inevitable. The doors opened with a soft chime. I didn't look back. In the mirrored panel, my reflection met mine, a woman with tired eyes. Blazer too formal for the hour. Face unreadable. But beneath it, I felt something I hadn't in years, a kind of lightness. Fragile but real. When the doors closed, the last thing I heard was the hum of the servers fading into silence, like an old song ending mid-note. I carried the box against my chest and stepped into the lobby. The cold marble beneath my heels steadying me for whatever came next. Months before that final meeting, I had already seen the cracks forming. They were small at first, overlooked code dependencies, unassigned credentials, documentation no one bothered to read. So I wrote the report. I named it plainly, without drama, Single Point of Failure Licensing Corps. It was a quiet act of self-preservation. I detailed every risk, how the licensing network relied on a single authentication chain, how the dual token protocol required my physical devices to validate root access, how redundancy wasn't just recommended, it was critical. I outlined the exact steps to distribute authority across the team. It was all there, clear, tested, time-stamped. The CTO, a man who prided himself on big-picture strategy, skimmed it in 10 minutes and stamped low priority on the header before forwarding it to a folder labeled Deferred Improvements. I remember staring at the notification in my inbox, wondering what part of single point of failure sounded optional. A week later, I followed up with an email to his office and to Victor Blake, Darren's predecessor. The message was short, professional, impossible to misinterpret. If I leave without transition, recovery will be extremely difficult. I even attached the revised architecture diagrams, annotated with access flowcharts. No one replied. The only confirmation I received was an automated "thank you for your contribution." By the next quarter, Darren had arrived, full of confidence and empty of context. My report never reached his desk. The SharePoint link expired after a policy update, archived into digital oblivion. Still, I kept a copy on my drive, out of habit more than hope. Looking back, I realized that memo wasn't just a warning, it was a prophecy written in plain English. I had handed them the blueprint for survival, and they'd mistaken it for background noise. When I packed up my things on that last morning, the file sat quietly in my personal folder, last modified 8 months prior. I didn't take it with me. I didn't need to. It was still sitting there, waiting just like the system it described, patient and unforgiving. 2 days after I walked out, the first email started to circulate inside Nexora. Nothing catastrophic, just little blips that looked harmless if you didn't know where to look. A client in Toronto reported a login delay of 6 seconds. Another in Dallas said their invoices weren't syncing. The support team opened tickets, tagged them medium priority, and moved on. By the third report, a pattern had begun to form, though no one wanted to say it out loud. Engineers blamed Chrome extensions. Someone suggested DNS propagation. Darren, ever the showman, called a team huddle in the glass meeting room overlooking the river. I could imagine him pacing, sleeves rolled, speaking in that practice tone he used when he wanted to sound visionary. "Growing pains," he said. "Every company experiences them after a restructuring." He meant my absence. The phrase made its way into the internal memo the next day. A headline printed in bold, "Short-term transition adjustments." I almost laughed when I read it. Not from bitterness, just disbelief at how predictable it all was. From my apartment across the city, I followed the ripples through public posts and support forums. I didn't need inside access. The symptoms were visible to anyone who knew what to recognize. A lag here, a timeout there, the kind of signals that always preceded a deeper fault line. In my living room, the morning sun filtered through the blinds, catching on the half-empty mug beside my laptop. The irony wasn't lost on me 16 years keeping the pulse alive, and now I could watch it falter from afar. My inbox still held the memo I'd written, untouched, unheeded. I opened it once more, scanning the line that had been ignored. Root verification requires dual physical token access. Reassign before personnel change. They hadn't. The hum of the city outside mixed with the faint whir of my home computer. Somewhere across the river, Nexora's servers were breathing unevenly, struggling to find their rhythm without me. I closed the memo, exhaled slowly, and let the silence settle. Some systems don't collapse in one blow, they unravel, one ignored warning at a time. By Friday night, the lights began to turn red. What had started as minor login delays was now spreading like a fever through Nexora's network. Europe went first. Licensed servers in Berlin stopped validating. Then Singapore lost its node cluster, cutting off thousands of users mid-session. Support channels overflowed, tickets multiplying faster than anyone could read them. From my apartment window, Chicago looked serene, the skyline gleaming under a cold blue dusk. I sat by the window with the news muted on my laptop. Nexora's clients were posting polite but panicked updates on LinkedIn. Anyone else experiencing downtime? The comments came in waves, frustration disguised as curiosity, worry masked as professionalism. I'd seen it before. The fire had started. Inside the company, the facade was beginning to crack. Darren still tried to control the story. He called an emergency meeting at 8 p.m., his voice calm but his collar damp with sweat. "It's a vendor issue," he insisted, pacing before the screens. "We'll isolate it by morning." But by morning, isolation was impossible. Asia's validation nodes failed completely, and the redundancy scripts refused to trigger. The automated alerts that should have notified the global admin team didn't go out because those alerts, too, were tied to the same root chain. My root chain. Someone tried to reach the CTO, but she was off-grid at a wellness retreat in Sedona. No phone, no signal, no backup delegate. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so predictable. In the open office, panic replaced arrogance. Engineers worked in silence, faces pale in the glow of dead monitors. One whispered, "We can't access the override shell." Another muttered something about credential expiration. The words, "root authentication failure," flashed on every screen like a sentence. By noon, the flagship platform's $69 million of code and contracts was officially offline. The hum of the servers quieted, leaving only the sound of voices breaking. Darren stood in the middle of it all, still clinging to optimism that had already burned away, and somewhere across the city. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the tremor in the air the moment when control finally remembers who built it. By Saturday morning, the panic had a name: root lockout. Every engineer in the building knew what it meant, even if no one dared to say it out loud. Darren had stopped pretending things were fine. The war room, once reserved for investor demos, was now crowded with exhausted faces and empty coffee cups. That was when Margaret Delaney, Nexora's chief financial officer, walked in. She was small, sharp-eyed, and known for treating numbers like living things. When she spoke, people listened. "Status," she said simply. No one answered. The silence stretched until a junior sysadmin named Brianna cleared her throat and mirrored her console to the big screen. Lines of green code scrolled, then froze on a single entry: "Last edit M. Kessler access protocol, dual token required." The room went still. Margaret leaned closer, reading it twice as if the letters might rearrange into something less damning. "Dual token," she repeated. Brianna nodded. "It means two physical devices have to verify root access. There's no override. We tried recovery mode, it bounced." Darren's voice cracked when he spoke. "She must have locked it before she left." Brianna looked at him, cautious but firm. "No, sir. The logs show the last modification was 8 months ago." Someone scrolled further down the system directory. A folder blinked in the corner, flagged red risk assessment urgent. The timestamp matched the date of Marin's memo. Margaret opened it, and the room filled with the quiet hum of realization. She read the first line aloud: "Single point of failure licensing core." The rest explained everything: redundancy plan, token chain, reallocation instructions, all ignored. Margaret closed the file gently, as if it were an obituary. "She didn't sabotage you," she said, her voice flat. "She warned you." The room stayed silent. The only sound came from the fans inside the dying servers, spinning uselessly against their own heat. Finally, Margaret looked up, eyes cold but steady. "We didn't lose her," she said. "We ignored her." And for the first time since the alarms began, no one had anything left to argue. By Monday morning, the chaos had reached the executive floor. The elevators opened at 10:30 a.m., and Daniel Greer, Nexora's founder, stepped out still wearing the travel creases of an overnight flight. He didn't wait for pleasantries or reports. The war room fell silent as he entered. the weight of his presence heavier than the silence itself. He walked to the front of the room, eyes scanning the sea of hollow faces. The screens behind them glowed a dull red, each one pulsing with the same message, root access denied. The sound of fans filled the space where confidence used to live. "Talk," he said. Darren started first, his voice trembling but still rehearsed. "We're experiencing unexpected downtime due to legacy constraints. We're already developing a." Daniel cut him off with a raised hand. "Who handled her offboarding?" No one answered. The CFO, Margaret, glanced toward Darren. Daniel turned fully to him. "You fired the woman who built this." Darren's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face flushed, then drained. "She was resistant to change," he stammered. "We needed agility. Her methods were her methods." Daniel interrupted, voice like glass, "Kept this company alive for 16 years. He stepped closer, lowering his tone until the words landed like verdicts. "You're not fired," he said. "You're removed." Firing implies dignity. Security appeared before Darren could protest. He tried to recover, muttering about optics. But the guards didn't pause. The door shut behind him with the same quiet finality that had followed Marin days earlier. Daniel turned back to the room. "Show me her files." Brianna reopened the risk report, the one marked urgent. Daniel read it in silence, his jaw tightening with every line. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm again, but stripped of all illusion. "She didn't fail us," he said. "We failed her." He closed the laptop, exhaled slowly, and looked to Margaret. "Find Marin Kessler," he said, "and this time, pay her." Outside, the city glimmered under pale light, and inside the glass tower, for the first time in days, the air felt like accountability. They sent a car for me before dawn. The city was still half asleep when I arrived, streets glistening from a light rain. The Nexora Tower cutting through the morning fog like a blade. I hadn't planned to come back, but the message from Daniel Greer had been clear. Consulting offer attached. Terms per your discretion. Inside the envelope. The numbers almost made me laugh. $1 in $500 an hour. Full indemnity. And a written retraction of every insult recorded under my personnel file. No apologies. Just business exactly how men like him atone. The war room was quieter now, stripped of bravado. Monitors blinked red and amber across every wall, the hum of dead servers filling the space where panic had lived for days. Daniel stood beside Margaret, his sleeves rolled, face drawn. When he saw me, he didn't reach for a handshake. He only said, "Thank you for coming." I set my bag down and went to work. The first connection was slow, the second faster. Each node hummed as it came back to life. A low mechanical pulse that spread like breath, returning to a body. One by one. The dashboards flickered from red to green. Engineers held their breath as the final light turned steady. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was reverent. The system was alive again. I disconnected my drive and handed Daniel a small black hard disk labeled in white ink redundancy plan, everything you wouldn't let me build. He took it carefully, like something sacred. "Before I turn to leave," I said quietly, "next time, promote from within." No one spoke. The glass doors closed behind me, muting the hum of machines, the shuffle of regret. Outside, the Chicago wind rose between the towers, sharp and cold, carrying the faint echo of servers steadying their rhythm. I walked without looking back. For the first time in years, I didn't feel tethered to their heartbeat. I had my own, and it was steady, strong, and entirely mine, behind me in the war room I'd once built. Daniel's voice broke the silence. "God help us," he whispered. "Who did we just fire?"